You
They
think you
say
can
restaurants
steal him
have their
from
own
me?
weather, a microclimate of
Stop,
clinking
you're hurting
cutlery and
me.
hushed vows. And if you stand very still before service, you
thought
can
you could
feel
get
a
away
cold
with it.
front forming behind
Look
the
at me
bar.
when I'm
I
talking
felt
to
it the
you.
night I chose to become invisible
Please,
in the
I
place
beg
that
you,
had my
stop
name
it.
above the door.
This
On
wine
paper,
is
I was the
completely
owner, the
unacceptable.
woman whose
How
signature
dare you
approved
serve this
menus
in
and
this
renovations and
establishment?
holiday
I want to see
bonuses.
the manager right
On
now.
paper, I was also a wife,
Look what you've done.
the partner of a
This
man
dress
whose
is
patience
ruined,
and power had
absolutely
steadied my life for a
ruined.
decade. But
Do you
paper,
know how
I
much
was
this
learning,
costs?
burns too
Don't
easily
tell
to
anyone,
carry a
please.
life.
I
needed to
won't.
know what the room felt like when the
But you
paper
have
was
to tell
taken
me what's
away and all
wrong.
that was left was a uniform and a body moving through it. It started with a letter that didn't read like a complaint so much as a confession. A server who had already turned in her apron wrote that she had been shouted at, called stupid, and shoved with a jeweled hand because a wine label looked too plain for a woman who collected expensive insults. She said that when she told the manager, he patted her shoulder and said,
Please
"Be
enjoy your
tougher.
entree, madame."
The guest is always
Thank
right."
you. It looks
I
exquisite.
set the letter
Your
aside
main
and poured
course.
myself water,
Enjoy your evening.
the kind of ordinary
Thank you very
mercy you
much.
forget to taste when you're busy. And then I picked it up again because my hand remembered something my eyes had tried to ignore. The second letter arrived 2 days later. Different handwriting. Same story. Humiliation rinsed off plates and carried into the alley with the trash. I told myself the incidents were exceptions. Most nights our rooms glowed with birthdays and quiet proposals and the small courage of strangers deciding to forgive one another over dessert. Still, the letters bloomed in my mind like bruises. I lay beside my husband and talked through solutions. More cameras, secret shoppers, training refreshers, a speech from me at pre-shift. He pressed a kiss to my temple and said, "Install more eyes. The moment anything looks wrong, I'll know." I nodded but felt the stubbornness rise in me the way yeast rises even in cool kitchens. "I want to know," I said. "Not just see." The tailor we call wardrobe found a white shirt and a burgundy vest that had belonged to 3 other people and to the idea of 1,000 more. She gave me an apron with a pocket that had collected the lint of many pens. I tied my hair back into a neat ponytail, took off my ring, and looked at myself in the staff bathroom mirror the same way I look at a stranger I might trust with news of my life. I practiced the kind of smile that says, "I am here to help you," without ever admitting I am also here to study you. The fluorescent light hummed above me like a nervous thought, and the mirror didn't argue. The first person to speak to me on the floor was a host I had hired, and once congratulated for handling a radio with grace. He handed me menus and said, "Reset 7 and 9, please." He didn't recognize me, and I decided not to recognize him either. The linens sighed under my palms. The stemware gathered my smudged face and gave it back to me in delicate fragments. I learned again how to count steps to the tables without looking down, how to tilt a bottle without bruising its story, how to catch a plate with a fingertip and make it look like choreography. No one called me ma'am. No one called me anything except excuse me and could you and thank you when etiquette remembered itself. Service is muscle memory in theater. You pretend you have endless patience until the pretending turns real. You say, "Of course." So many times it becomes a form of prayer. The first week, I made small mistakes that warmed my ears and taught my ego humility. I called Cabernet Cabaret. I carried flatware to table 10 when table 8 had asked. I forgot to offer pepper and then circled back with the mill like a penitent. No one threw a glass. No one said my name like a warning because no one knew it. A busser, with a tattoo of a sparrow, showed me how to stack plates in a way that saved a wrist from a long future of ache. "Like this," he said, "so the weight sits where you can forgive it." In the kitchen, the sizzle of butter over heat writes the only language that never needs translation. A dishwasher stacked plates with the care of an archivist. The pastry chef hummed a melody from her childhood and piped lemon cream onto a tart as if she were repairing the day. I washed my hands until the skin near my knuckles thinned like paper and still smelled the ghost of garlic when I raised my fingers to tuck a flyaway hair. Between courses, I learned the map of the room, the aisle that always bottlenecked near table 12, the blind corner where the bar back and I practiced not colliding, the spot beneath the chandelier that turned every guest into someone they wanted to be seen being. I learned to read the temperature of a table by the first sentence they offered me. "We're celebrating a remission" arrives differently than "we're on a schedule," and both arrive differently than "we were told the owner sometimes stops by." Sophia arrived on my second week, 19, with shoulders that held themselves like a small apology. She kept her pens clipped in a straight line and her tray hand steady by force of will. She was working 2 jobs and studying at night, a fact she offered only when I asked how she could possibly smile after a 9-hour shift. "I practice in the walk-in," she said, "so the cold will keep it from melting." I watched the room test her and watched her pass barely some nights, bravely most. When a guest snapped fingers, she pretended they were snapping for a favorite song and nodded to the beat only she could hear. When someone asked, "Do you understand English?" she said, "I understand hospitality," and recommended a dish that made their mouth fall open for better reasons. Not everything I saw was cruel. A father lifted his baby so he could see the chandelier and said, "Those are stars pretending to be glass." A woman in her 70s ordered the cheapest wine and drank it like it was a story she loved. A table of nurses cut their steaks into bite-sized pieces first, so they could keep talking with their hands, then laughed until they cried and folded their tears into napkins as if they were secrets the linen would keep. Every kindness made me greedy for more. Every insult made my stomach a small fist. At home, I unloaded my pockets into an old ceramic bowl, hairpins, 2 paper clips, a guest note that said, "No cilantro, please," a coin I didn't recognize from a country I want to visit someday. My husband listened. He is a man who has seen tempests bend to the right signature, a man who believes in systems, and he suggested again that we let more lenses do the looking. We compromised. He installed additional cameras tucked into the shadow lines where molding meets ceiling, and he swore he would use them as a promise, not a threat. "If anything happens," he said, "I'll be there before the second hand finishes a circle." I believed him because love, at its best, is an infrastructure. By the end of the second week, the uniform had learned my body the way a second language learns your tongue. The staff knew me as March. The manager complimented my hustle and asked if I might want more shifts because I had the right temperament for disappearing. I smiled and thanked him for the compliment he didn't mean as a confession. I began to understand what power looks like when you set it down on the bar and walk away from it. It looks like being ignored until the moment someone needs you. It looks like opening a door for a guest and hearing them say thank you without ever seeing your face. Saturday arrived heavy with reservation names that could double as company mastheads. The bar glowed with the wet sugar smell of expressed citrus. The dining room kept catching me in its mirrored walls and returning a woman I could almost unknow. I polished glassware until the stems felt like stems from another species. I checked the light at table 3, nudged the candle at table 12, adjusted the low stool for the guest who always needed to rest her handbag on something polite. The maitre d' looked at me with the relief of a person who needed an extra pair of hands and said, "Float for me tonight." I nodded and let the room pull me where it wanted. I assigned myself to the edges because edges make the best observatories. From there, I could watch a celebration find its volume and a disappointment find its napkin. I refilled waters and pretended not to notice a proposal rehearsal happening in whispered fragments behind a menu. I garnished a martini with a twist so thin I could see my pulse through it. The kitchen called fire, walk, behind, corner, and the music of survival arranged itself into a score you can only hear when you are part of it. At 7:28, a host passed me a note that said simply, "VIP arriving at 7:30, special attention," and I felt the room's pressure drop the way a storm announces itself before a single chair moves. I didn't need to see the name to recognize the weather. Sophia stood at the stand arranging menus the way you arrange thoughts before an exam. The manager checked his tie in the mirrored wall and straightened it even though reflections always exaggerate. I set down the tray I was carrying and felt the bar top under my palm, cool and certain, the way a lake feels at morning before a boat tests it. This is not the night the worst thing happens. That is coming, a page already written that I cannot yet read aloud. This is the night I choose my seat in the theater of what will soon matter. The night I learn how much I can see from the margins. It is the night I look at the cameras tucked into their seams and decide I am grateful for them because my husband needs to sleep, and grateful for my own eyes because I need to wake. It is the night I watch Sophia take a breath that looks like a square of courage folded small enough to fit in a pocket. The doors open and a new wind enters the room. The chandeliers flicker as if someone has whispered a different script to them. Somewhere in the kitchen a pan hisses the way thunder clears its throat. The maitre d' lifts his chin and starts toward the entrance as if walking toward the weather itself, and I, unremarkable in my vest and apron, step sideways into the kind of stillness that learns. because edges make the best observatories. I stood still and listened to the room breathe, learning how storms gather without warning, and how patience becomes shelter before thunder speaks. Tonight, morning light looks different when you've traded ownership for anonymity. It doesn't spill through office glass anymore. It catches in the steam from dishwashers and the gleam of polished forks. On my second week undercover, I began to notice the rhythm of the floor the way a pianist learns tempo through fingertips. The mornings were quieter, the air thick with sanitizer and the sleepy hum of espresso machines coming alive. We moved like clockwork, resetting linens, polishing glassware, counting cutlery that never quite added up. Sophia arrived early, her hair tied back with a band that had lost its elasticity. "You're early too," she said with a grin that looked borrowed from hope. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, which was true. I'd lain awake thinking about the distance between me and the world I thought I understood. Here, there were no board meetings or contracts, only bodies in motion, each person carrying invisible stories heavier than trays. The head waiter barked orders like a conductor keeping a fragile orchestra in time. I followed his rhythm, repeating the choreography until muscle replaced thought. The more invisible I became, the clearer everything else was. The way the pastry chef's laugh could cut through exhaustion like sunlight through kitchen smoke. The way the bartender hummed gospel under his breath as if each drink needed blessing. The way Sophia would always offer to take the heavier tray without asking. There was an unspoken code here. You suffer together quietly, or not at all. That week, I learned the science of pretending. How to smile when a guest scolded you for being too slow though their watch gleamed with diamonds. How to nod when they called you sweetheart or honey, as if your name didn't matter. How to thank them for tips that were smaller than their egos. Each time I felt something inside me bend and whisper, "This is what it costs to keep peace." During lull hours, Sophia shared fragments of her life: a mother who cleaned houses, a brother who sold snacks at night, a dream of graduating before 30. She laughed when I asked why before 30 mattered. "Because life doesn't wait," she said simply, like someone who had already learned that truth too young. I wanted to tell her I could help, that there were scholarships, networks, safety nets, but I couldn't break my disguise. All I could offer was listening, and sometimes listening is the purest form of respect. One evening, I carried a tray past a table of executives discussing markets and margins. Their words were sharp, full of numbers that used to belong to my world. One of them gestured vaguely at me without looking up. "See, good staff is like assets, replaceable but necessary." I smiled the way one does when insult and irony shake hands. Across the room, Sophia balanced 4 plates, her lips moving as she whispered the table's order like a prayer. I watched her feet. She moved with the precision of someone who knew mistakes were noticed more than efforts. Later, she spilled a drop of sauce near a guest's cufflink. The man sighed theatrically. "Can't anyone train these people?" he said, not to her but to the universe, which always listens when arrogance calls. She apologized softly, offering to pay for dry cleaning. He waved her away. When she turned, her eyes glistened like wine about to spill. I handed her a napkin under the pretense of cleaning a glass. "You did nothing wrong," I whispered. "They just needed someone to feel taller than." She looked at me, surprised, then smiled weakly. "You sound like my mom," she said, and that small trust felt heavier than any tray. Nights bled into one another. I learned to read moods by footsteps. The chef's heavy boots meant pressure. The host's click meant arrival. I learned to time smiles with the rhythm of orders. Appetizer, entree, apology, dessert, redemption. I learned that kindness is contagious but fragile, that one cruel customer can sour an entire shift. And still, the staff kept showing up because rent doesn't care about dignity. On Friday after closing, we sat around the service table, legs aching, laughter dissolving the fatigue. Someone played a playlist of old love songs, and Sophia hummed along while cleaning silverware. "What would you do if you weren't here?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Maybe teach. Maybe open a bakery. Something where people leave happy." Her answer pierced me. I had once said the same thing to a mentor years ago, before success replaced sincerity. The next day, a new policy memo came in from corporate, my husband's team testing a customer loyalty program. The manager read it out loud without enthusiasm, his voice bouncing off walls that had heard too many false promises. "Remember," he said, "guests come first. Always smile. Always apologize. Always comply." Sophia folded the memo and whispered, "Even if they're wrong." "Especially if they're wrong," he replied. The words stung, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were mine, written years ago when I believed customer satisfaction was the same as respect. I felt shame tighten around me like an apron string. That night, I stayed late to help sweep the dining room. The lights dimmed, leaving reflections in the window, one of me, one of Sophia stacking menus. Outside, the city shimmered with the kind of indifference only the wealthy can afford. Inside, we moved through our small rituals of care. "Mar," Sophia said suddenly, using the name everyone called me by, "why do you work so hard? You could get an easier job somewhere else." I hesitated, choosing my lie carefully. "Because sometimes, the hard place teaches you what easy places never will." She nodded, accepting it. Maybe she understood more than I thought. The following week blurred with routine until a Wednesday lunch broke the pattern. A middle-aged woman in pearls ordered sparkling water, then complained it was too bubbly. She sent back 3 glasses before sighing, "Do I have to do everything myself?" The manager rushed over with apologies. The kitchen froze mid-motion. I could feel the tension ripple like heat before a storm. Sophia served her next, trembling slightly. The woman's smile was thin enough to cut. "You again," she said. "Try not to ruin my day this time." I wanted to intervene, but the manager's glance held me still. Power has its own gravity, and that woman's orbit pulled everyone into silence. Later, in the back room, Sophia leaned against the wall, breathing through her fear. "Why do they hate us?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, seeing both her youth and my own reflection decades ago. "They don't hate you," I said softly. "They hate needing anyone at all." She frowned, not fully understanding, and I didn't blame her. Some lessons hurt too much to learn before you must. Over time, I began to respect the invisible artistry of service. The way a server can sense a guest's mood before they speak. The way a kitchen runs on trust more than recipes. The way laughter can fix what no paycheck ever could. I noticed that even in exhaustion, Sophia's kindness never cracked. Once, a guest left her a handwritten note that read, "You made a bad day better." She tucked it into her apron like a medal. Watching her, I realized I had built temples of marble but forgotten the people who prayed inside them. On my last night of the second week, a thunderstorm rolled over the city. Lightning flickered through the restaurant's glass walls, briefly turning every diner's reflection into someone else's ghost. Sophia whispered, "It's like the sky is washing something away." I smiled. Maybe it is. When service ended, we stood at the entrance watching rain paint the pavement gold. I thought of my husband, of the cameras he'd installed, of how he believed protection was enough. But standing there beside Sophia, drenched in neon and fatigue, I knew better. Some truths have to be felt, not filmed. She looked up at the storm and said, "Tomorrow's my hardest shift." Saturday crowd. The lady in burgundy usually comes. Her tone carried both dread and resignation. I didn't yet know that this would be the moment everything turned. But I knew storms gather their patience before they strike. I placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Then we'll face it together." She laughed softly. "You talk like my mom again." "Maybe that's not so bad," I said. Lightning flashed once more, framing her face against the glass like a photograph I didn't know I would need to remember. Behind us, the restaurant lights dimmed, and the reflections faded until only our silhouettes remained, 2 waitresses standing in borrowed uniforms, unaware that by the next evening, the entire world inside those walls would shift. Saturday evening carried a different kind of hum, the sound of expectation wrapped in perfume and polished shoes. The reservation book was full by noon, every table a promise of celebration or complaint. I arrived an hour early, drawn by a tension I couldn't name but felt gathering like static under the chandeliers. The staff moved faster, laughter thinner than usual, and even the kitchen seemed to chop more carefully, as if the knives knew a storm was coming. Sophia was quiet. Her hands moved mechanically through her side work folding napkins, restocking the sugar caddies, but her eyes kept darting to the front door. "She usually arrives late," she whispered. "She likes people to wait for her." I knew who she meant before she said it. The woman in burgundy, the one whose complaints traveled faster than dessert orders, whose name was spoken with the same caution as fire. I had seen her in reports, receipts, and complaints that managers softened to protect repeat business. But tonight, I would see her without filters. When she entered, the air shifted. Even the chandeliers seemed to bow a fraction lower. She was tall, her blonde hair sculpted into careful waves, every strand rehearsed into place. Her dress, a deep burgundy satin, clung to her body like entitlement, had been tailored into fabric. Diamonds glinted at her neck and wrists, not as decoration but declaration. The hostess hurried forward, apology already spilling from her lips. "Mrs. Patterson, welcome back. Your usual table is ready." Patterson didn't respond immediately. She scanned the room, eyes sliding over each face until they landed on Sophia, who froze mid-step. "Oh, it's you again," she said, her voice sugar-cut with glass. "I was hoping they'd finally found someone competent." The words rippled across the floor like a dropped plate. Sophia forced a smile, bowing slightly. "Good evening, ma'am. I'll be taking care of you tonight." "Taking care," Patterson repeated, her smirk sharp. "We'll see about that." She sat down, spreading her handbag across the table like a throne. I stood at the service station, my pulse steady but my jaw tight. It was one thing to read about cruelty, another to watch it unfold in real time. Sophia brought over the menu, hands trembling just enough to make the crystal water glasses clink. "I'll start with sparkling water, room temperature, lemon on the side," Patterson ordered without looking up. "Organic lemon, of course, and not that cheap brand you people usually serve." "Of course," Sophia murmured. "We only have—" "Don't tell me what you have," Patterson interrupted. "Just do what I asked." The manager hovered near the bar, pretending to polish a bottle that didn't need polishing. I could tell he wanted to intervene but also wanted to keep his job. I'd hired him 3 years ago because he was calm under pressure. Tonight, calm looked a lot like cowardice. Sophia returned moments later with the water, setting it down carefully. Patterson lifted the glass, examined the bubbles, and frowned. "This is too cold," she snapped. "Did I not say room temperature?" "I'm so sorry, ma'am, I'll replace—" "Forget it," Patterson said, waving her hand. "You've already ruined the start of my meal. Just bring the sommelier. Maybe he can salvage this disaster." I could see Sophia's face pale, her breath shallow. She walked toward the bar where I stood and whispered, "She's worse than last time." "You've got this," I said softly, my voice low so only she could hear. "Just breathe. One table, one night." She nodded, shoulders stiff. When she turned back toward the dining room, her composure was that of a soldier stepping onto a battlefield she hadn't chosen. Over the next hour, Patterson found fault with everything: the lighting, the bread temperature, the music volume, the service pace. Each complaint landed like a lash across Sophia's patience. I busied myself with nearby tables, pretending to polish silverware but watching every detail. Guests at surrounding tables pretended not to notice, their eyes flicking up only when Patterson's voice rose. It's strange how luxury can make cruelty seem like theater. A little after 8, the restaurant was full, a living organism of clinking glasses and murmured conversation. Patterson had just been served a bottle of red, a vintage older than Sophia herself. The young server handled it perfectly, presenting the label, cutting the foil, wiping the lip. As she tilted the bottle to pour, another waiter brushed past too closely. Just a small bump, hardly noticeable. But it was enough. A few drops of wine splashed onto the hem of Patterson's burgundy dress. Time stuttered. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then came the sound, sharp, furious, echoing. "You stupid, clumsy idiot." Patterson shot up from her chair, the glass tipping, her voice slicing through the restaurant like glass through silk. Conversations died mid-sentence. Sophia froze, still holding the bottle, eyes wide with terror. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" Patterson shouted. "Do you?" Sophia stammered. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, it was an accident, An accident?" Patterson sneered. "You think I care? This is imported, custom-made, worth more than you'll make in your miserable little life." I took a step forward, unable to stand still any longer. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my tone calm. "It was a small spill. The staff will cover the cleaning. There's no need to. Patterson turned to me, eyes flashing. And who are you? Another waitress? Did I ask for your opinion? No, I replied evenly. But I believe kindness costs less than dry cleaning. The guests nearest to us pretended to study their plates, but their silence was a verdict. Patterson's lips curled. I'll have you both fired by the end of the night, she hissed. You people forget your place. Ma'am, please, Sophia pleaded, her voice trembling.
You think you can
I'll pay
steal
for
him from me?
Patterson laughed, cruel and
Stop,
sharp.
you're hurting me.
You can't even afford to look at this dress. Her voice
You thought
rose,
you could get away
dripping
with it.
venom.
Look
Trash
at me
like you
when
should
I'm
be grateful
talking
for
to you.
scraps. I saw Sophia's
Please,
hand
I beg
shaking,
you, stop
her
it.
knuckles white around the
This
bottle.
wine is
Ma'am,
completely unacceptable.
I'm truly sorry.
How dare you
Sorry?
serve this in this
Patterson
establishment?
stepped
I want
closer,
to see the manager
her perfume
right now.
thick and suffocating.
Look what you've
You're
done.
not sorry
This
enough.
dress is ruined.
The slap came without
Absolutely
warning,
ruined.
a sound so loud the air
Do you know how
itself
much
seemed to
this
flinch.
costs?
Sophia
Don't
gasped.
tell anyone, please.
My cheek burned
won't.
before I realized the handprint wasn't
But
on
you
her,
have
it
to
was
tell
on
me
me.
what's wrong.
I had stepped forward, and Patterson's anger had found a new target. For a second, the room went silent, as if every heartbeat held its breath. That's for speaking out of turn, Patterson said coldly. I straightened slowly, tasting blood where my teeth had caught my lip. You just assaulted me, I whispered. Assault? She laughed. That was discipline. Then, before I could react, her hand
Thank you,
fisted
it
into my
looks
ponytail
exquisite.
and yanked
Your main
hard.
course.
Pain
Enjoy
shot
your
through my
evening.
scalp.
Thank
My
you very
knees
much.
buckled. Gasps rippled across the dining room as she dragged me backward, shouting, "This is what happens when servants forget their place." I reached up, trying to pry her fingers free, but she pulled harder. "Stop!" I cried out. "Please!" My voice broke, but she didn't stop. The marble floor burned against my knees as she dragged me past table after table. The sound of phones unlocking clicked through the silence. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." My hair tore under her grip. I could feel it. "This is what you deserve," she screamed. "Garbage in a uniform." I thought I heard Sophia crying somewhere behind me, but the world had narrowed to pain and humiliation. When she finally let go, I collapsed, trembling. My scalp throbbed, strands of hair clinging to her manicured fingers. I heard her breathing hard, victorious. "Let that be a lesson," she said. I lifted my head, meeting her gaze through a blur of tears. "It will be," I whispered. And then before anyone could process it, the restaurant doors slammed open. A familiar voice, low but thunderous, filled the room. "Take your hands off my wife." The world stopped moving. Every face turned. Patterson's expression faltered as my husband strode forward, eyes blazing, security behind him. "You're what?" she stammered. He reached me in 3 long steps, kneeling beside me, his hand trembling as it brushed my cheek. "Maria, are you hurt?" My throat tightened. I could only nod. He rose slowly, turning to Patterson. "Do you know what you just did?" His voice was quiet now, the kind that makes even arrogance tremble. Patterson blinked, color draining from her face. "She was rude, I didn't know." "You didn't know she owns this restaurant," he interrupted, "and that she's my wife." The silence that followed was almost holy. Every phone, every whisper, every movement froze. Patterson took a step back, shaking her head. "That's not possible," she whispered, but the truth had already rearranged the air. My husband called to security, his tone final. "Hold her." And as the guards approached, the woman in burgundy's poise shattered like the wine glass she had knocked over. The night had changed, and so had I. The marble floor still remembers the sound of my knees hitting it. In the seconds after my husband's voice split the room, the world hung suspended between silence and reckoning. Patterson's fingers loosened from my hair, and I fell forward into his arms. The crowd parted, as if a wave of shame had rolled through the dining room. I could hear someone sobbing Sophia, maybe in the faint click of cameras being lowered by people who suddenly remembered what decency was. My husband's hand was steady against my back, but I could feel the tremor beneath it. He had always been calm, composed, the kind of man whose anger was measured in decisions rather than volume. But that night, fury sat behind his eyes like a storm waiting for command. "Are you all right?" he whispered. "Talk to me." My throat was dry. "I'm okay," I lied, though the sting in my scalp told another story. He helped me stand. The floor felt foreign, slick with spilled wine and the weight of too many stairs. Patterson stepped backward, her confidence cracking. "I didn't know she didn't say who she was." "She shouldn't have to," my husband said, his tone cutting through her excuses like glass through silk. "No one should have to announce their worth to deserve respect." His words were quiet, but they filled every corner of the room. Even the kitchen had gone still. You could hear the sizzle of forgotten pans cooling. Patterson's mouth opened and closed without sound. Her diamond bracelet glinted under the lights, a cruel reminder of how easily luxury blinds the soul. "You can't just," she began. "You assaulted her," he interrupted. "You dragged my wife by her hair across her own restaurant floor. You humiliated her in front of her staff, her guests, her employees. You didn't just insult her, you insulted every person who has ever worked for their dignity." The manager finally moved, stepping out from behind the bar with his face pale and trembling. "Sir, I didn't realize." "No," my husband said sharply. "You didn't, but you will from now on." He turned toward security. "Escort Mrs. Patterson to the private lounge. Do not let her leave." The woman sputtered. "Wait, you can't detain me." "You're right," he said coldly. "But the police can." The guards approached. Patterson's hands fluttered uselessly at her sides. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. It was a misunderstanding." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught somewhere between fury and exhaustion. Misunderstanding, that word the powerful always use when cruelty backfires. Sophia appeared at my side, her eyes red, hands trembling as she handed me a wet towel. "I'm so sorry, Maria," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "You did nothing wrong." Across the room, guests began to murmur, a tide of whispers rising like wind through trees. Some looked away, embarrassed to have witnessed such ugliness. Others recorded discreetly, already knowing that justice had found its next headline. Patterson's mask of privilege cracked further. "You can't call the police," she pleaded. "Do you have any idea who my husband is?" My husband's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "Your husband is my business partner." The words fell like a gavel. The gasp that followed came not from Patterson but from the crowd, realization spreading faster than rumor. "Or rather," he added, pulling out his phone, "was my business partner." He dialed a number, his tone clipped and steady. "Jonathan? Terminate every contract with the Patterson Group, effective immediately." He paused, eyes still locked on her. "Because his wife just assaulted mine." Patterson's knees wobbled. "Please," she whispered. "I'll apologize. I'll pay for everything. There isn't enough money to buy back your character," he said. "And even if there were, I wouldn't sell mine to you." The officers arrived minutes later, their presence slicing the tension like clean air after a fire. They listened as my husband explained what had happened, as security replayed the footage from multiple angles. On screen, Patterson's fury unfolded frame by frame, the slap, the hair, the dragging. It was all there, undeniable and ugly. Patterson covered her face, tears streaking her makeup into rivers of ruin. "Please," she sobbed. "I have children." My husband's voice softened, but not enough to offer rescue. "Then you should have thought of the example you were setting." When they led her away, the clack of her heels against marble sounded like the final note of an old empire collapsing. The restaurant was silent again, the kind of silence that arrives after thunder, leaving only the smell of rain and regret. My husband turned to the staff. "Everyone, take 5 minutes," he said. "You've seen enough for one night." The room emptied slowly, like a wound learning to breathe. Only Sophia stayed behind, her hands clutching the hem of her apron. "I can't believe this happened," she whispered. "It shouldn't have," I said, brushing my fingers through what was left of my ponytail. "But it did, and maybe it needed to." My husband reached for me again, his expression breaking into guilt. "I should have stopped it sooner," he murmured. "You got here exactly when you needed to," I said. "Any earlier, and maybe I wouldn't have seen what we'd built." He frowned. "What we built?" I gestured around the room, the wine stains, the overturned chair, the eyes of my employees peeking from the kitchen door, a place where power and fear coexist too easily. I took a breath, feeling the ache in my scalp pulse with my heartbeat. It's time that changed. The rest of the night blurred. The police took statements. The guests left quietly, leaving behind half-eaten desserts and abandoned apologies. I sat in the manager's office with a cup of ice pressed to my head, watching the CCTV footage replay silently on the monitor. Each frame felt both unreal and intimately familiar, as if I were watching centuries of arrogance compressed into minutes. Sophia entered softly, carrying a cup of tea. "You should go home," she said gently. "You've been through enough." "So have you," I replied. "But you stayed. I didn't want to leave you alone." Her voice trembled with sincerity, and I realized how rare that sound had become in my world. "Thank you," I said. "You reminded me why I started all this in the first place." She smiled shyly, eyes still glistening. "To make people feel seen?" "Exactly." Outside, the rain had started, soft at first, then heavier, as if the sky itself wanted to wash the evening clean. My husband returned, his suit jacket draped over one arm, the other carrying a report from his assistant. "It's done," he said quietly. "Contracts terminated. Press already calling. You're going to be all over the news by morning." I exhaled. "Then let them see what respect looks like when it bleeds." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I've always admired your strength." "It's not strength," I said. "It's survival." He reached for my hand. "Then survive beautifully." We left the restaurant after midnight. The streets glowed with reflections, amber lights rippling in puddles, taxis sighing through rain. I walked beside him barefoot, heels dangling from my fingers, scalp throbbing but heart steady. Somewhere between pain and pride, a truth settled quietly inside me. Humility can be armor, but dignity is a weapon. The marble floor would remember the scene, but so would I, because humiliation only lives forever if you let it. By dawn, the headlines would speak of assault and scandal, of a socialite's fall and a billionaire's fury. But beneath those words, a quieter story waited, the story of a woman who learned, through pain and silence, that worth is not announced, it is lived. And somewhere in that same silence, I promised myself this: never again would cruelty walk free in my house, no matter what name it wore. The next morning arrived not with sunlight but with the buzz of notifications. The story had already escaped the restaurant's walls, multiplying across every screen like spilled ink. Socialite assaults. Restaurant worker turns out she's the owner. Billionaire's wife dragged by partner's associate. Headlines crawled along every news ticker, and each one felt both surreal and inevitable. I sat at the breakfast table with my husband, the air between us heavy with aftermath. He scrolled through his phone, his jaw tight. "It's everywhere," he said quietly. "Video footage, eyewitness accounts. They're calling it the marble floor incident." I stirred my coffee but didn't drink it. Good. Maybe they'll remember it long enough to think before they act. He looked up at me, concern softening the edge of his voice. "Are you sure you want this public?" "It was already public," I said. The moment she screamed at Sophia, the moment I hit the floor, this isn't my shame to hide. Outside, the city was waking up, pretending nothing had changed. But inside every message, every call, every post, the ripple had begun. Patterson's name was everywhere, two blurred faces, deleted comments, statements of apology that sounded more like excuses. "She's begging for a settlement," my husband said, putting down his phone. "Her lawyers called mine. They're terrified." I looked at him. Let her feel what it's like to be powerless in a room she thought she owned. He nodded once. "She already does." Over the next few days, the collapse unfolded like slow theater. The Patterson Group's board released a statement distancing themselves from her. Her husband filed for divorce, and their social circle disintegrated overnight. Invitations vanished, charity boards revoked her membership, and sponsors cut ties. The woman who once commanded attention with a glance now crossed streets under hoods and sunglasses, afraid of recognition. I should have felt vindicated, but what I felt instead was a strange, quiet satisfaction mixed with sorrow. There was no joy in watching someone's humanity crumble, it only confirmed how fragile ours is. At the restaurant, I returned sooner than anyone expected. The staff froze when they saw me walk in wearing the same uniform I had been dragged in. "Mrs. Maria, are you sure you should be here?" the manager asked nervously. "I should have been here all along," I replied. Sophia ran to hug me, tears in her eyes. "They said you might not come back." "I always come back," I said softly. "That's how change starts. Word spread fast that I was working the floor again, not as a disguise this time, but as a declaration. The guests who entered that week came with quiet curiosity, some apologetic smiles, some nervous eyes. I saw phones lowered, hands more careful, words more measured. Respect, it turned out, was contagious when people were reminded it could disappear. That evening, my husband arrived unannounced. He stood at the bar, watching me refill water glasses and check tables, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to prove anything," he said when I approached. "Maybe not," I answered. "But they do." He smiled faintly. "Always the teacher." I shrugged. "Someone has to be." Later, we sat in the empty restaurant after closing. The lights were low, and the floor gleamed where it had been scrubbed of blood and wine. He poured 2 glasses of the same vintage that had started it all. "To karma," he said. I raised my glass. "To dignity." We drank in silence. "I've terminated every remaining deal with the Patterson family," he said finally. "It'll cost us millions." "Then it's money well spent," I replied. "The price of integrity is always worth paying." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, a still from the CCTV footage. It wasn't the violence, it was the moment after. The frame caught him stepping through the door, his hand outstretched. My face lifted in shock. "I had this printed," he said, his voice softening, "not because of what happened, but because of what it reminded me. Power only matters when it protects, not when it punishes." I stared at the picture for a long time. "You should hang it in your office," I said, "so people remember." He smiled. "I already did." The next morning, Patterson's lawyer released a statement announcing her formal charges: assault and battery. She pleaded guilty. No theatrics, no press conference, just a weary woman in court facing the consequence of her own reflection. I didn't attend the hearing, but I watched the recording later. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she whispered, "I forgot people had feelings." The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that forgives nothing. I closed the video and exhaled. Some lessons come too late, but they still matter. Weeks passed. The viral outrage faded, replaced by new scandals and shorter memories. But something stayed. Guests began leaving thank you notes for staff, tipping better, speaking softer. I noticed fewer snapped fingers, fewer insults disguised as jokes. The air in the restaurant changed. Maybe the marble floor still remembered that night too. It seemed to shine differently, as if proud to have witnessed something real. Sophia thrived. I promoted her to supervisor, the youngest in our chain's history. On her first day in the new role, she brought me a small envelope. Inside was a note written on a napkin. "You made a bad day better." "He left this months ago," she said, smiling. "I kept it because it helped me stay kind." "Keep it," I said. "Reminders like that are sacred." She nodded, tears welling up. "I will." After she left, I stood alone in the dining room. The chandeliers glowed softly, their reflections rippling across the polished glass and polished hearts. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, apologies, and small triumphs that had unfolded here since the beginning. The humiliation had become history, but its lesson remained alive. My husband joined me near closing. "We've rebuilt faster than I expected," he said. "People admire how you handled it, with grace." "Grace is just anger that's learned how to breathe," I replied with a faint smile. He chuckled. "Then you're the calmest storm I know." "Maybe because I've learned storms don't always destroy," I said. "Sometimes they reveal what should have been washed away long ago." He looked at me for a long time. "You've changed." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped pretending." Outside, the city lights flickered like tiny apologies. Inside, I ran my fingers across the smooth marble where I had fallen weeks before. The floor was cool now, gentle. "You know," I said, "this floor once held humiliation. Now it holds memory. That's progress." He slipped his arm around my shoulders. "You turned pain into a landmark," he said. "Not everyone can do that." I leaned against him, closing my eyes. "Then, let's make sure no one ever has to again." That night, as we left through the front door instead of the back, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The tables were empty, the candles flickering out one by one, each flame bowing gracefully before sleep. I thought of Patterson somewhere across town, alone in her apartment, learning the weight of silence. Karma had a strange way of restoring balance not by vengeance, but by truth. And truth, once seen, never leaves a room the same. The marble gleamed under the last light. It didn't look like a battlefield anymore. It looked like forgiveness learning to walk. The weeks after the storm were quieter. The city moved on. The headlines dissolved into archives, and the world found new scandals to feed on. But inside the restaurant, something had shifted that no article could capture. The air felt lighter, as if the walls had exhaled after holding their breath too long. People looked each other in the eyes more. The laughter of servers wasn't nervous anymore, it sounded like it belonged. I started coming in every morning before opening, not as an owner reviewing reports, but as a woman tracing memory. I'd walk the marble floor with my shoes off, feeling the coolness seep into my skin, a reminder that pain can harden surfaces but also polish them. The reflections in the glass no longer looked like ghosts. They looked like witnesses. Sophia arrived early one morning, balancing 2 cups of coffee. "You're here before me again," she said, smiling. "Old habits," I replied. She handed me a cup. "Then maybe keep this one." We stood by the window watching dawn spill across the street, washing everything in quiet gold. "How's your new role treating you?" I asked. "Scary," she admitted, "but the good kind of scary. The kind that makes you want to grow." I nodded. "That's the only kind worth having." She hesitated, then said, "You know, after everything that happened, I thought I'd feel bitter. But I don't. I just feel awake." Her words landed gently but deeply. "Awake is good," I said. "It means the lesson stayed." She smiled and walked off to start the shift. I watched her greet the team, guiding them with patience I recognized in myself from years ago, before I forgot that leadership isn't about control, it's about care. Later that day, an elderly couple came in, holding hands like time had never passed. They sat at the same table where Patterson once Saturday. The irony wasn't lost on me. I served them personally. The woman's eyes were kind, her smile soft. "It's our anniversary," she said. 50 years. Her husband laughed. "She still makes me apologize first." "Smart woman," I said. We talked for a while about love, endurance, forgiveness. Before leaving, she touched my hand and said, "You have kind eyes, dear. Don't let the world change them." I wanted to tell her it already had, but maybe that wasn't true. Maybe the world hadn't changed my eyes, just clarified what they needed to see. When they left, I stood by the table, letting the weight of her words settle like dust in sunlight. That evening, after closing, I found my husband in his office. On the wall behind him hung the framed CCTV still the moment he burst through the restaurant doors. But it wasn't rage that defined the photo. It was recognition. His eyes, wide with realization that love sometimes hides in places power forgets to look. "You kept it," I said. "Of course," he replied. "It reminds me of why we started all this." "For success?" I teased. He shook his head. "For meaning." We sat together in silence, the kind that no longer needed to fill itself with words. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked finally. "Going undercover, getting hurt." I thought about it. The pain, the humiliation, the fear, and then I thought of Sophia's smile. The way the staff now held their heads higher, the way guests treated them like equals. "No," I said softly, "because it woke me up. I thought I owned a restaurant, but what I really owned was a mirror. I just hadn't looked into it yet." He nodded, eyes glinting with pride. "You turned a scandal into a story people needed to hear." "It was never just my story," I said. "It's everyone's who's ever been made to feel small." Days turned into months. Patterson's name faded from headlines entirely. The last I heard, she worked part-time at a small boutique across town. Some said she'd changed. Others said she hadn't. But I hoped she had. Not for her sake, but for the world's. Cruelty loses power when it learns remorse. One afternoon, a delivery man brought a small parcel addressed to me with no return label. Inside was a letter written in careful, trembling handwriting. "Maria, you don't know me, but I used to work at one of your restaurants years ago. I quit because of how I was treated by guests. I saw your story online, and it gave me courage to start over. I wanted to say thank you for reminding me that we deserve respect too." There was no signature, just a simple line at the end. From someone who now stands taller. I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal next to the first one, the complaint that had started it all. Two sides of the same coin, pain and purpose. They belonged together. That night, I walked through the restaurant one last time before closing. The chandeliers shimmered softly, their reflections rippling across polished tables like whispers of forgiveness. Sophia waved goodnight, and I waved back, watching her disappear through the doors with the confidence of someone who had finally seen her worth reflected in another's eyes. I stood there a moment longer, tracing my fingers over the edge of the counter. Every surface in this place had absorbed a story, the laughter, the exhaustion, the cruelty, the redemption. That was what dignity was made of. Not perfection, but persistence. Not silence, but the choice to speak kindly even when no one listens. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection one last time in the darkened window. I didn't see the woman who'd been dragged across the floor anymore. I saw the woman who had learned to stand taller afterward. And that, I realized, was power, the kind that can't be bought, bruised, or broken. As I locked the door and stepped into the quiet street, the night breeze felt like absolution. Above me, the city glimmered millions of windows, each holding someone else's unseen story. Somewhere out there, another person was learning that dignity isn't a reward, it's a decision. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever been made to feel invisible, remember this. The world will try to define you by how softly you speak, how low you bow, how quickly you forgive. But real strength lives in your calm. Real justice happens when you keep your grace. And real power? It's in how you treat people when nobody's watching. That's what dignity is made of. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that kindness still matters, follow this channel and share it with someone who needs to believe in quiet strength again. Every story we tell here is a reminder that even in silence, humanity still speaks.